Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On New Year's Day in 2019, I posted an interview with one of my favorite religion journalists, Sam Kestenbaum. Sam finds, researches, and writes about often overlooked topics in religion and spirituality, such as the Owaspy Bible, the Cosman Temple, and the Black Israelites or Hebrew Israelites. He has also written about the Igbo of Nigeria and their interest in Judaism, a Sri Lankan guru, a Jewish militia leader, and basketball star Amare Stoudemire's interest in Judaism. He finds groups who somewhat defy easy categorization and tells their stories. Lately, Sam has been exploring enchanted politics in his profile pieces of Jonathan Cahn, a Doomsday Prophet pastor who says the Bible predicted the presidency of Donald Trump, and A Course in Miracles, the mystical text that inspired Marianne Williamson's run for the presidency in the 2020 Democratic primary race. Sam's two most recent long pieces, titled #MAGA Church, the Doomsday Prophet Who Says the Bible Predicted Trump, and The Curious Mystical Text Behind Marianne Williamson's Presidential Bid, are both out now in the New York Times. It is these two pieces that we discuss in depth in this article, and I highly recommend you read them both. Sam Kestenbaum is an independent religion journalist. He writes for the New York Times and is a contributing editor and former staff writer for The Forward. He spent several years working in Asia and the Middle East, where he edited a newspaper in Sana'a, a website in Ramallah, and a magazine in Beijing. He lives in New York City. If you are curious about Sam's backstory, his path in journalism, how he came to be intrigued by his areas of interest, or his approach and methodology to journalism, please revisit episode 87 because it's a fascinating conversation. You can find Sam online at samkestenbaum.com, on Twitter at @skestenbaum, or on Instagram at @skestenbaum. You can check the show notes for links to the articles under discussion, as well as links to Sam's website and social media. You can follow Classical Ideas on Twitter at classical_ideas or Patreon at patreon.com/Classical Ideas Podcast. So without further delay, please enjoy my next conversation with return guest, Sam Kestenbaum. Sam Kestenbaum, welcome back to Classical Ideas.
Happy to be here.
Sam, so you were here on the show over the winter in 2019. I think you were my New Year's episode, actually. And
Right.
It's really great to have you back. And I'm curious what you have been working on with regards to religion since I last had you on the show when we discussed the Owaspy Bible, the Cosman Temple, and the 90s vampire subculture of New York. So what is new?
Yeah, I've continued to do religion writing. People will probably mostly have come across my work in the New York Times. I've come into a kind of a light residency program at the New York Public Library. I have what they call a wartime scholar, meaning I'm often working out of the Midtown main branch of the New York Public Library, which is this amazing, beautiful, historic building there. And they have all sorts of odd and rare books that I kind of dive into, and which have informed some of the pieces that I've been working on since then. Again, mostly kind of like feature pieces for the New York Times is where most of my energy goes. I'm also doing some kind of scholarly work, a chapter in a forthcoming book with Routledge on Kendrick Lamar and Hebrew Israelite theology or belief. And that's mostly what I've been up to. These two most recent New York Times features, I think, is what we're going to kind of segue into here. A lot of some of the materials that led to those came from readings and research that I was doing at the New York Public Library.
Wonderful. Well, I am really excited today to talk to you about two of your recent feature long pieces in the New York Times. And I'm wondering if we can start off with your most recent one about Marianne Williamson called The Curious Mystical Text behind Marianne Williamson's presidential bid. Does that sound like a good place to start today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Excellent. So this piece is just out this past week from the New York Times. As Marianne Williamson, as audience members will know, Marianne Williamson is currently running for president in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. So what was the instigating moment for you as the reporter for pursuing this story?
When I was on last, we discussed an earlier piece of mine about the Owaspie Bible, which, not to get too sidetracked here, was a kind of mystical Bible produced by a Manhattan dentist in the 19th century. And this sprouted a kind of a small religious movement that kind of flared up and flickered away. And I, doing that work and kind of immersing myself in that really interesting book got me thinking about other American scriptures. Kind of some of the kind of better known homegrown, American Bibles. Of course, the Book of Mormon is the kind of most famous from that early era, but it got me kind of just researching other American scripture and the ways in which these texts are produced, the kind of arguments that happen around them, the kind of struggles for authority within the community, and the kind of ways they emerge in the public square. And in terms of A Course in Miracles, there really is no better known popularizer of this book than Marianne Williamson. So she, has been on my radar kind of before, I guess, or before her this kind of latest political act, because she was interesting to me as essentially an evangelist for this American scripture. As I write in the piece, no one really has done more to spread this book than Marianne. Often people will say, as I think we'll get into it, but the woman who actually channeled this Bible, this American Bible called A Course in Miracles, a Manhattan psychologist named Helen Schucman. People will say that, if Helen Schucman is the kind of the prophet or the kind of founder of this movement, then Marianne, is like is an apostle. So Marianne really has done a lot to spread this book, and that's kind of why she interested me. And I was kind of surprised, really. I knew she was interesting. I don't think I knew that she would have this kind of viral moment that she did at the debates. I'd been kind of working on the story for a while, and she had this kind of runaway, kind of viral moment on the debate debut on the debate stage, which gave a real kind of added punch to this article when it came out.
Did you get to meet with Marianne Williamson to discuss the article?
Yes, several times. Yeah, this is somebody who has been doing work in the public for decades. She's a very she's been kind of in celebrity circles, in public work for many years. So she's, no stranger to kind of working kind of the mechanisms of media and how that all works. So yeah, we spent time together when she launched her latest book. It's her 13th, and it's kind of essentially like a kind of a platform piece for her presidency called A Politics of Love. And so she had an opening here, and we spent time at that. I also met her for some time in the kind of hotel where she was staying here, where we spoke, and we had several follow-up phone conversations too. So yeah, we spent time together. It would have been great to have spent more. I typically like to spend a lot of time with my subjects if I can. Marianne, of course, is running for president.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. She's doing a lot, and not in New York. And I'm based in New York, so I kind of got as much as I could, basically. And she's she's a very as I hope comes across in the piece. She knows what she's doing. She's very practiced. She, like I said, she's been, appearing on the Oprah Winfrey Show and Super Soul Sundays, in these kind of big platforms for decades. So she knows how to do this. She's very much kind of on message now, so it's kind of hard to catch these types of people kind of off guard. That is, folks who kind of speak publicly for a living. But there's a kind of a polish to what she's doing. And she was, was she excited about the piece? I think she was happy to speak to me, I think also because I'm coming at this, unlike some of my kind of peers in kind of the political reporting world. I was particularly interested in her background, as a kind of spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
And in particular about A Course in Miracles, which, is regularly mentioned in the pieces about her. I don't think folks are kind of, one of the reasons that I took the approach I did to this article is I felt like folks weren't really, that is, other writers or reporters weren't necessarily looking as closely or seriously at this book and Marianne's work with it. I felt it was kind of brushed over pretty quickly in most of the profiles of her as just kind of a footnote in her kind of new age stardom. But in fact, it really fueled her whole project, and that was the approach I took to speaking with her.
Well, Sam, you have such a good eye for texts, and I follow you on Twitter. Like, you're constantly posting fantastic little discoveries that you make in your research. And I feel like A Course in Miracles, the book by the psychologist Helen Schucman, might be something that a lot of listeners have never really heard about. Can you tell me a little bit about the context of the authorship of A Course in Miracles by Helen Schucman?
This is a channeled Bible that comes out of kind of 1960s New York. Helen Schucman is a largely kind of non-practicing Jew from New York City who, would often kind of describe herself and is described in kind of in materials about her as a kind of unlikely prophet or unlikely mystic, and that she is in this kind of secularized milieu, academic, interested in kind of scientific processes. Later in her life, in her 40s, actually, she goes back to school and gets a doctorate, and then works at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. So she's working there as a research psychologist, and sometime in the mid-60s, she begins having these kind of mystical experiences. At the same time, she's having kind of conflicts with her coworkers, particular her colleague Bill Thetford, who becomes a collaborator in this book. And as kind of course insiders tell this story, they're fighting and they're kind of trying to find a better way of living is kind of the thing that Helen wants to, comes to realization that there has to be a better way, some way to kind of live without conflict. And she has these kind of visionary experiences. And one, she has this vivid dream. She's in a cave unfurling a ancient scroll that says the name God on it. In another, she's in the subway and she has these people, she sees her passengers glowing in light. One night she begins hearing this kind of inner voice telling her to take notes. So this is A Course in Miracles. Please take notes, it tells her. And she's like really uncomfortable with this, the story goes, but ultimately kind of begins writing down what this voice is telling her. And she comes to believe this is the voice of Jesus, the historical Jesus of Nazareth, speaking to her. A kind of an inner dictation is what it's called. And she writes this down. This kind of channeling goes on for many years, and with the kind of help and kind of massaging of kind of a group of collaborators, including most importantly Bill Thetford, who is her who she's working with there. They produce this huge volume, three book volume of channeled material, and publish it in 1975, a limited edition, and then later in 76. It's published without anybody's name on it. Helen doesn't want her name on it. She's kind of deeply troubled by it. Again, the kind of the story goes, and I spoke with one of the publishers of this book, and she said it wasn't that Helen didn't believe that this was important, but it's that she couldn't do it, or that she was kind of unwilling to live by what this book was telling her to live by. And, I think it's important to kind of back up and look at, some of the, kind of where some of these ideas come from. So this book is kind of, the way has been kind of paved in kind of the American context by New Thought, by Christian Science, by, movements that are teaching, some version of the idea that, thoughts are causative, that reality is kind of created by the mind, by thought. And the kind of the thumbnail belief, the real kind of shortened version of what the Course in Miracles is teaching is that, reality is an illusion, that conflict, can be overcome by the power of love and a kind of a positive thinking, and that this shift in perception produces miracles. So it's deeply concerned with the power of good or right thinking.
So Marianne Williamson finds this book after, she was a seeker. She's studying transcendental meditation, books by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who people may know from the recent Netflix documentary series Wild Country. But then she becomes a teacher of the Course of Miracles after a series of signs that you write about in the piece. What does a teacher do when teaching classes on the Course in Miracles? Were you able to find out any information on actual classes?
It varies widely. I visited several classes here in New York and got to know some Course students. That material is not in the piece, but I've been to several meetings here. So, it really varies. The Course is an interesting thing in that it's actually, designed for self-study. There are these three volumes. There's the kind of central text, and then there are these two other pieces, which one is kind of for students and one is for teachers. So it's kind of a self-contained document that's why there are no Course in Miracles clergy. You don't need to be accredited in any particular way to do that. You can really study it on your own, which is how a lot of people study it. Little kind of study groups have kind of cropped up after it came out. It also found a lot of popularity in unity churches, which are, some listeners might know, are other kind of New Thought Christian formations. And this book kind of gelled well with what they were doing. But in Marianne's case, it's kind of unique in that she went on to actually to use this book. So she moves to LA, she begins teaching classes, and in time she opens up these things called Centers for Living, first in LA and then in New York, which are kind of teaching kind of course-related messages to people living with HIV. And this is a kind of a kind of particular application of the Course, which is, where Marianne really gets her first kind of big boost in popularity, is doing these things which were quite innovative at the time, and reaching out, to her credit, reaching out to a community that kind of been sidelined by the medical establishment. And so she's, in those meetings, she would be presumably, reading passages of the Course, kind of her own interpretation of it. Students are, in the groups that I visited, students are encouraged to kind of interpret kind of for themselves almost, and a lot of kind of wide-ranging discussion about how to apply the principles of this text. Hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah. Have you been able to spend any amount of time with Williamson's books themselves? Have you been able to sit down and read her work?
Yeah, no, I've read several of her books. That A Return to Love was the kind of debut, comes out in 1992, and it's kind of billed as a extended interpretation on A Course in Miracles.
Okay.
I think it's like reflections on the principles of A Course in Miracles, or something along those lines.
Okay, so her writing does jump off of The Course in Miracles?
Yes, definitely. Some kind of more explicit than others. Like I say, the first one absolutely is like kind of an extended interpretation of the Course. Several others which all kind of followed at a regular clip afterwards also do this. There's one, I'm forgetting the name, but kind of how to apply A Course in Miracles for weight loss. There's one about how to apply A Course in Miracles for kind of business success, basically. I think it's called the Law of Divine Compensation is what it's called. Other times it's a little more oblique. Not everywhere is she kind of quoting from the text, but certainly in those early years and at kind of particular junctures, the Course is front and center of what she's doing. When she goes on the Oprah show to promote her first book, which is when most people were introduced to her for the first time, she is there talking about A Course in Miracles, and the story goes that Oprah, kind of praises the book, that is, praises A Return to Love, Marianne's book, and says that she has experienced miracles in her own life after reading this. So Marianne's books are, some of them quote the Course at length, others mention it in passing, but she, in conversations with me, she, really cited it as the book that kind of saved her life when she was kind of floundering as a young woman.
Okay, well, so now Williamson is running for president, and she is, as you mentioned, she had a viral moment during the debates when she talked about love within the debates near the end. And she also has gone on record as saying that the current president's tactics, she's called them dark metaphysical traditions. What do you think? What do you think she means by that?
Just as she speaks about harnessing love as a political force, she talks about those who are harnessing fear as a political force. So I think that's what she's speaking to there. And, in the kind of debate moment, she said, Mr. President, I think you know what you're doing. So, I think she believes that the president, and I don't think she's alone here. I think she's kind of putting it into more kind of mystical terms, but that Donald Trump has kind of harnessed fear as a way to win the presidency. So I think that's what she means by that. I think another kind of interesting, Marianne Trump connection here is that, Donald Trump, for all the kind of noise made about his kind of evangelical support, he also comes out of a kind of a motivational or self-help environment. His childhood pastor was Norman Vincent Peale, the famed author of The Power of Positive Thinking, and he grew up going to Marble Collegiate, the Manhattan church where Peale was the leader, and so it goes even further than that. In that, Marianne actually led classes at Marble Collegiate on A Course in Miracles. Would have lectures there weekly until not too long ago. So these two characters are kind of in some way drawing from some similar kind of springs of kind of American celebrity and philosophy, I guess. And so for I think there's something just kind of a footnote there, but for Marianne to say that Trump is kind of doing something deeply dark, I think it just needs to be pointed out that Trump kind of first made, his splash really as this kind of, with his own kind of series of motivational books, The Art of the Deal, other kind of how-to literature. So there's some kind of something kindred there.
Were you able to get a sense of how followers of the Course feel about Williamson's current political ambitions?
So Marianne's, celebrity at times has kind of eclipsed the Course, altogether. And I think that that's some kind of context for understanding how people are looking at her now. And that, I think, she is a celebrity on her own right. And some folks may have the feeling that she, has kind of gotten famous off the course, and maybe kind of lost something along the way. I do think that there's that sense. One person I spoke to in the article who's friendly with Marianne and kind of supportive in some personal way. This author John Mundy, he was very clear with me that Marianne can kind of have this interpretation of the course as being a document that might hold some that she might draw upon as a way to kind of change the political world or change change society. But to him, the course is not a political document at all, and is really meant for kind of personal transformation, not transformation of society. So there's some ambivalence about it. And Marianne has had kind of some kind of institutional kind of blow-ups over her career, as I think probably most celebrity will. And so it's not necessarily clear that everyone who follows the course is going to rally around Marianne. I think far from it. The course for them is maybe just one kind of a personal document they study, not something that's going to inform how they vote.
Something that I follow as well within religion journalism has been the recent coverage of the religious left, and I'm talking about figures like Rachel Held Evans, Reverend William Barber, and these are often written about by your colleague Jack Jenkins. Do you think that Williamson's brand of mysticism has a future in the religious left?
So these categories are contested, obviously, and there's a lot of discussion around it. I don't do a lot of writing on that exactly, but I will say something, that I think when we think about the religious left, capital R, capital L, I don't see figures like Oprah, like Marianne, kind of lumped into that category. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that Marianne might not always identify as a, religious leader. And, the same way someone like Reverend Barber does, right? She doesn't hold a title. She doesn't come out of any particular mainstream tradition. She doesn't hold a theological degree. It's much more of a kind of a folk tradition, if we can think of it like that, a kind of a folk metaphysical tradition. And so I think there's, Marianne didn't finish college. She's a kind of a entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So, I think she can come with this kind of imprimatur of the stamp of religious legitimacy. So there's a kind of something is happening there. I think when we think about what constitutes the religious left, these are often figures who come out of these kind of stalwart traditions or from liberal divinity schools. And so there are, the figures like Marianne are a little more, it's a little more murky. And then another reason why I think it might not always be seen that way is that, what I guess we could call kind of New Agers. Marianne kind of disputes this term often, but I think it's useful, and I think in a broad sense people understand what we mean by it. Their politics might not always kind of align neatly with kind of political establishment either. So yeah, there's more to be said there, but those are just some thoughts kind of on standing on one foot here.
Excellent. Well, I want to change gears a little bit, Sam, because I also read your other large piece that you wrote about a month or two ago, called #MAGA Church, the Doomsday Prophet Who Says the Bible Predicted Trump. Can we talk about that for a little while?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so on the other side of the political aisle, you profiled a doomsday prophet, pastor, rabbi named Jonathan Cahn, who says the Bible predicted the current president, Donald Trump. And this was such a fascinating piece, and I'm hoping to, drive some people back who may have missed that piece because it's so good. But who is Cahn, and why is he important in the modern political environment in the United States?
So Jonathan Cahn is a best-selling author of end times interpretation books, published by Charisma House, which is a large kind of charismatic Pentecostal publishing house. He leads a large New Jersey church that is this kind of beautiful and strange-looking building that's made up to resemble the Temple of Jerusalem. He grew up in a Jewish family. He still identifies as Jewish. He had a kind of a conversion experience in his late teens, I believe, or in early 20s. I'll have to look back at the exact time. And he kind of enters into kind of Jesus movement adjacent traditions. He's kind of blending his kind of Jewish background with this kind of newfound his newfound Christian or born again beliefs, and he kind of rises in kind of Christian media. He's leading a radio show. He's really drawing from his Jewish background, and he kind of makes a name for himself as a interpreter of end times prophecies. And in particular, what he comes to do is kind of like many others before him, kind of map out these beliefs onto, or rather kind of take politics or contemporary social events and use the books of use kind of end times interpretation to kind of as a way to kind of decode contemporary events. He publishes a series of books. Particular people came to know him for his kind of interpretations of the September 11th attacks, and describing these as kind of as having a parallel to the punishments which were rained down upon the ancient Israelites for going against God. And he most recently has kind of latched on to the kind of rise of Donald Trump, and is kind of reading certain kind of prophetic import into Donald Trump's rise and win. And this has made him a kind of a figure in certain kind of charismatic and Pentecostal circles in the media world. These are largely, I'm saying charismatic Pentecostal, but these are largely non-denominational spaces. Mm-hmm. His church there is not, it is associated with a messianic umbrella group, but he's really kind of doing his own thing. And most of the people who Jonathan associates with are also kind of non-denominational leaders, media figures. They're not necessarily, coming out of any kind of theological or kind of well-defined theological camp. They're not, kind of hardcore polemicists or, it's very much there's a kind of almost like a folksy charm to Kahn's project. His claims to knowledge are not based on, listen, I hold this degree from such and such a place, but rather that, God has kind of revealed these things to me. I've had these miraculous experiences. My life was saved. I see these kind of symbols and signs wherever I go. And in conversations with me, he would kind of drop these miraculous, these kind of very descriptive, colorful anecdotes about how the funding for his church came from a mysterious Native American who walked in, and his name was Wahoo, and he wanted to give money, and it was kind of God's hand doing this. At other times, his life was spared not once but twice when a train hit his Ford Pinto. He does international ministries, and he would kind of have kind of describe hearing demonic voices when he was pastoring to groups overseas. Just all of these really kind of a real kind of enchanted landscape that Cahn describes, and so it's from this that he kind of makes his claim to knowledge and builds up this very large following. Largely online, but his church here is very well attended, and he becomes a kind of a I guess we can't really say televangelist because he's not really on TV, but he's a web evangelist, and many people encounter him on YouTube for the first time or on Facebook. So that's a lot there about Cahn, but that's kind of a brief portrait of what he's doing.
And I actually went and watched several of his videos on YouTube, and some were like 250,000 views, 700,000 views. I mean, this is like a guy who is attracting a gigantic audience. And I'm curious how you originally found him. How did he grab your attention?
Sure. So as some of your listeners may know, or as you may know, I was a staff writer for the old Jewish newspaper, The Forward, for a few years. I'm still a contributing editor there and stay in touch with those folks. And during my tenure there, I kind of was interested in picking away at the kind of borderlands of Jewish identity, I guess we can say, and writing often about Jews who have kind of moved into other places or, other kind of religious communities or traditions, or are kind of blending these things. And, figures like Cahn, I mentioned that what the temple looks like, what his church looks like, but the kind of Hebrew element is a major part of what Cahn's doing. So he'll wear a prayer shawl. He calls himself a rabbi. People will go there kind of for their experience of a kind of a Hebrew liturgy. He'll use some Hebrew from the stage. They even have a kind of a mock Ark of the Covenant that's kept in the back. It's very, there's a lot of kind of pageantry at this church. And so it's, there's a theatrical feeling to it, and people are drawn to that, and they can kind of play around with Jewish symbols, experience something a little exotic, much like maybe someone would feel if they went to a yoga class or something.
Yeah.
It's a way to kind of dip into a thing which is you kind of know is maybe not yours, but you feel some sort of kindred feeling to. So a lot of non-Jews will go there for an experience. I mean, of a kind of some sort of Hebrew feeling. So Cahn had been, on my radar for a while, and I one day just decided to go out to see if I could meet him. And I knew that there had been this kind of particular Trumpian turn. His latest book, the last book, The Paradigm, was all about Trump's rise, and he's comparing Trump to Jehu, the king in the Hebrew Bible, who goes up against the house of Ahab, who he describes as the Clintons, and becomes a leader of the Israelites and casts out idols, destroys the temple to Baal, who is described in the Hebrew Bible as a god needing human sacrifices. So Cahn makes these kind of connections to abortion with the human sacrifices and Baal, and it's very it's very he's lifting passages to make a particular argument, right? It's a very particular kind of exegesis he's doing here, and a kind of a, like I say, this is not a studied at Yale Divinity School, or this is a paperback pulpy novels that are pulpy kind of airport reads that are read by his followers. So it's a very particular kind of interpretation that resonates with a particular type of person. So without I'm afraid I've lost my train of thought here, but he right. So I go out there. I go out there and I meet Cahn. I know about this new kind of political turn he's taken, and I tell him that I want to. So I spend a Friday Sabbath with them, and I tell him that I'm a writer and I really want to speak with him more at length about his project, and I want to attend more services. I want to speak with people, and Cahn was very, very open. He made time for me. He let me speak kind of without minders, that is, without people kind of watching over me to congregants, and he took kind of great care in telling me his story. So that's kind of how that started anyway.
Well, and I'm curious about this a little bit as well, your attendance at the church, because, I went onto YouTube and I watched some of his lectures and I found some of these hugely viewed videos, and then I scrolled down to the comments, and some of the comments call Cahn precious and very timely. Another one says that Cahn has hit the bullseye for 2019. Another comment said that Rabbi is a great teacher of the word. So he resonates with huge audiences from what I can tell. What were those conversations like with congregants and people that you were talking to who attend services with Cahn?
Yeah. So the makeup there is interesting. There are people who come weekly to both services. There are people who come just on, so they keep a Friday night service where they light the Sabbath candles, and then a Sunday service where it's kind of more, I guess, kind of, at least timing wise, it's a little more traditional, just a Sunday morning at like I forget, 10 or 11. So people, it draws an interesting crowd because people might belong to another church in the area or elsewhere and come there as well, as a kind of extracurricular or a kind of another, to kind of dip into something else, as another kind of dose of kind of Rabbi Cahn's worship there. And so these are, a mix of people, there are a handful of other kind of messianic, that is, people who kind of grew up in Jewish homes, who might still call themselves Jews, who come there, and yeah, these are people who Rabbi, Jonathan Cahn is the kind of centerpiece of this congregation. He is the draw. Every day after services, wares are for sale in the back, and he'll sell his books there and sign them. New congregants get free copies of the book. So, there is Cahn, the pastor or the religious leader, and Cahn, the author. But these two things are very, very much kind of they blend together. And there at the services, you see that these books are also for sale in Spanish. A lot of a lot of Spanish speakers also there. What else can I say about the church itself? It's a large kind of cavernous space that was once a department store. that has been redone. There are very kind of colorful theatrical lights that flash up on stage. And, people there would describe, as I think you saw as you waded into those comments, people described Cahn to me as a kind of a prophet, or, someone who at least has kind of prophetic gifts. Now, I think it is important to say that, those who might be drawn to Cahn's work, might also believe that God could speak to them, or that they might, also kind of have miraculous experiences of their own. And people there would describe things to me like that as well. It's a kind of it's a very kind of enchanted view of how the world works. A woman described seeing, what to someone else might look like a sunset over the cityscape of Manhattan. This was right after Trump had announced the Jerusalem, a move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and she said that this was God lighting up these buildings with heavenly light. And to someone else that might look like a sunset, and to her she was seeing something very something else there. And I think it's also, it helps us to understand how people might encounter Cahn also, or and I guess I'll just leave it there.
These two articles, I was thinking about what these two articles bring together for me personally as a reader. And so for me, I've been following your work now for some time. And to me, your work doesn't tend to write about largely mainstream groups. That doesn't really kind of seem to be where your focus is for the most part. But when we talk about Williamson and Cahn, these two figures, The Course in Miracles, Doomsday Prophet, these would not really be considered mainstream ideas in society, but I feel like they're now gaining popularity. Do you kind of see like the fringes of religion and mysticism as becoming far more mainstream going into 2020?
I guess I would say that I don't think the kind of enchanted undercurrents are ever kind of very far from the surface. And I think we are seeing a kind of enchantment enter into the political realm, whether it's the kind of charismatics that are kind of coming to the fore around the president, be it Cahn or others kind of in his circle who see themselves as waging a kind of a spiritual warfare, or whether it's these kind of American metaphysical threads of Williamson's project, or A Course in Miracles, a channeled Bible from the kind of earlier counterculture. I think, we were seeing a kind of emergence of kind of enchanted, maybe more kind of American folk religion, might be a way to think of it, really. And that's maybe surprising, because these are not kind of emerging out of kind of storied intellectual institutions or think tanks, right? These are from be it Cahn's books. These are kind of apocalyptic airport reads, or Marianne kind of Oprah endorsed metaphysics. These are kind of threads of American religious formation that appeal to a lot of people. So yeah, I don't know if exactly that they are even fringe. I think they might just be kind of undercurrents that we don't know is see.
I love that. Well, Sam, that is our hour today. I'm really grateful to you for coming back on Classical Ideas to talk about your ongoing projects. I love following your work, and I love these two articles, #MAGA Church, the Doomsday Prophet Who Says the Bible Predicted Trump, and the curious mystical text behind Marianne Williamson's presidential bid, both out recently from the New York Times. Where can you direct people's attention if they want to follow your work and know more?
Sure. Well, if listeners are social media people, which it seems as if everybody is, you can follow me on Twitter, S Kestenbaum, or on Instagram if you do that. Also S Kestenbaum. I keep my website up to date pretty quickly, or pretty frequently, so you can find my website. And or just check in to the New York Times every once in a while, which is where most of my kind of energies are going now.
Excellent. Well, Sam Kestenbaum, this has been a real pleasure to have you as a return guest on Classical Ideas. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Happy to do it.
Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is composed and performed by Derek Strybig. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you like this show, please rate it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me at classicalideas@outlook.com. Or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/classicalideaspodcast. Thanks so much for listening.